Vice News did a fantastic report on a toxic coal ash pond called Little Blue Run. This is a really interesting story that I knew nothing about before seeing this, so let's listen to a portion of it.
Me is Little Blue Run, which is the largest coal ash impoundment in the U.S., poorly disguised as a lake with this unnatural blue color. It spans over 2 states and contains 20 billion gallons of coal ash.
Little Blue was built in the 1970s, and over the years has leaked large amounts of arsenic and selenium into the nearby communities. When the residents discovered the chemicals seeping onto their property, they notified the state that they were going to sue First Energy Power if the problem wasn't fixed.
The Environmental Integrity Project went to the federal government and said, we want something done about this or we're going to sue the federal government. So the federal government, I guess, went to our state DEP and told them they better get their act together and make them close it down.
Just 59 days later, the federal court ordered First Energy to close the pond and begin the long process to clean up the site. Sandy Wright has advocated for the closure of Little Blue ever since it failed to live up to the energy company's promises.
They showed us this beautiful lake that looked like a nice state park. It had a motorboat on it with a girl on water skis. It had, somebody fishing in a cove, and it just looked like a great place. They explained that we would have almost lakefront property because we only live about 1.5 miles from it. So we were pretty excited about that. But over the years, things went south.
When did you start questioning what was going on down there?
Some of the local hunters were seeing stuff coming out of the hillsides, and they said, gee, it looks sort of bluish and foamy like the stuff that's inside the impoundment. Environmental Protection went down there and investigated, and they found that, yes, the stuff was leaking out through the hillsides.
Now, the video there was a little cloudy because it was a cloudy day out, so you couldn't really see it. You couldn't really see the color of it, but it's this bright blue color, which is totally unnatural because the entire thing is polluted with coal ash. That's incredible. I had no idea these things existed. I had no idea. I had heard of attempts to make freshwater lakes and ponds in areas where they didn't exist, and then over time it became salt water as opposed to fresh water, and then everything died out, and then it became like a ghost town. I think there was a place in Utah or something like that that had that experience. I knew about that. I did not know about this, that essentially it's this giant toxic waste pond that's masquerading as a real pond, even though the entire thing is destroying the environment. But more importantly, you heard it there, it's leaking arsenic and selenium into local water supplies and onto local property, and it's just ruining everything in the area. And as I was listening to that, I was reminded of a different story about pharmaceuticals and the FDA, and how I think it was in the 1990s, there was a law passed which made it so that the FDA was stripped of a lot of its funding, and the slack was picked up by the pharmaceutical companies themselves. And what that did is it opened up this system of legalized bribery and legalized corruption. How are you supposed to effectively regulate the pharmaceutical companies if you're the FDA when they're paying more than half of your paycheck on a weekly basis? You can't do it because, you have a conflict of interest to look out for them and look the other way when they screw things up behind the scenes or fiddle with stuff or take things that aren't totally safe and they push them out there in the marketplace. So the FDA is going through this, and the EPA goes through this a lot as well. I mean, this is the oldest Republican trick in the book. You have this issue of what's called regulatory capture, where you cut the funding for these various regulatory agencies, and then you have the funding come from the industries themselves that are supposed to be regulated, and then usually the final piece of the equation is you hire somebody to head the regulatory agencies that used to be the head in the industry itself. So they're experts in the regulations because they're used to evading them. So it's a classic case of the fox guarding the hen house, and that's the norm now. And when the only way in which you can have somebody approve the idea of a toxic coal ash pond to begin with is if from the beginning there was corruption and regulatory capture and this giant problem. So hearing this story, I mean, it just sheds light on multiple problems in our government and multiple problems with our various industries. I mean, I'm fairly convinced that there's little to no regulation for almost any industry in America anymore, because we have a corporatocracy, essentially. I mean, the corporations and the rich have so thoroughly bought the government and taken over the regulatory bodies that, I mean, it almost is like that libertarian utopia, right? Where there is no real efficient regulation of the marketplace. There's a few examples here and there, but so few and far between that, you know, it's so seldom that it's almost not even worth mentioning, because the bulk of the cases are stuff like this, which is an absolute disaster. So what we need to do, clearly, is get money out of the political system, repeal those laws which allow the industries to fund the regulatory agencies, and get back to decent governance. Get back to a system where the government is actually an independent third party which represents the people, and they step in and say, sorry, you can't use that ingredient, it gives people cancer. Sorry, you can't make a toxic coal ash pond because it's getting into people's water supply. Sorry, you can't frack over here because when you hold a lighter up to the faucet, the water catches fucking fire because you're not doing the right thing when you pump the chemicals into the ground. We need a government that's going to step up and do these things, because that's the whole purpose of government in the first place, is to prevent business from running amok and prevent the downside of externalities. So this is a great report from Vice News. They did a great job with this.